Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today I wanted to do a book review of Yiyun Li's Dear Friend, From My Life I Write to You in Your Life. This is a book I saw on Sean the Book Maniac's channel, and he was so affected by it and so moved by it and thought it was so powerful that I immediately ordered that book. By the way, this is becoming something I do more and more often after watching people's, or even in the middle of watching people's booktube channels. I'm not sure the book impacted me in quite the same way it did Sean, but it's a really powerful and really well-written book. Yiyun Li is a Chinese-American writer who gave up a life of probably a successful career in sciences when she came to the United States to become a writer, and she's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Project. And she's, I think, published 2 or 3 novels and a couple of books of short stories. And this book, which is ostensibly a memoir of the 2 years of her life in which she spent in and out of hospitalization with suicidal depression. The writing in this book is beautiful. The sentences are carefully measured. The words are carefully weighed. You can feel that the author really crafted these sentences, but you feel that without feeling like they're the least bit overwritten or the least bit unnatural. They are like gossamer in some cases, where they're so fine and so delicate that anything that went wrong or any wrong move would have kind of made the whole thing fall apart. And oftentimes the meaning, the weight of the individual chapters, which in some ways are like individual essays, rest and hang on just a few sentences for bringing together meaning and the purpose in writing that chapter. But having said that, you should know the book is odd. It's not a classical memoir. There is not a linear narrative. It's not really even a complete look at her life during those 2 years. Instead, it's an exploration of her thoughts during those 2 years and how the writers that she read and their letters and diaries led her in her own thinking. And I guess in some ways led her to a place where she could continue living her life and move forward. So there are a lot. I said the book's kind of odd, and there are a couple of things about it I just want to point out. The author here in the book classifies at one point memory as melodrama and says she wants to put melodrama behind her. But this is a memoir, and it contains her memories of her hospitalization, her memories of her life in China, going back to her childhood and her difficult life growing up in China and her difficult home circumstances. There are elements of melodrama in her own life, which she then brings forward and puts in the memoir. She writes about her desire to keep autobiography out of her fiction, and how she used to stress about the idea that her characters were not her or a part of her, no matter how much they resembled her. And yet here she's written a memoir, which is nothing short of biography or autobiography. And then what I think is most important, one of the most important chapters, is the chapter in which she explains why she decided to not write in Chinese, to not speak Mandarin Chinese, and to even try to stop thinking in Chinese. For her, she wants to put that life in China behind her. Quite possibly because that life was really difficult, and quite possibly because that life is the source of her depression. But by doing so, she's been accused by Chinese people and by American critics alike of abandoning her heritage, of refusing to speak about the things that happen in her home country, and refusing to publish works that can be read by people in her home country. I think what she does here, and I think what she states here, is that she wants to sever that life from the life she has now. And since the book hovers around the issues of her attempted suicides or her suicidal depression, it's almost as though she has decided that cutting off this portion of her life, excluding the Chinese language from her life is a way of ending that life that she had before, and only living her life as an American. So that's what I think. I have no idea how healthy that it is or unhealthy that it is. I would say that it seems to work. If you read the description of the book, it makes it sound as though that she was able to kind of heal herself from depression by reading, and that's really not the case. This book is not a prescriptive. She doesn't give you a list of books to read if you're depressed that will make you not depressed. In most chapters, she talks about two authors. Oftentimes, those two authors are polar opposites on whatever topic she's talking about, whether it's about innocence or indifference or selfishness or memory or melodrama or their relationship with their family. She sets up these chapters where she juxtaposes the ideas about that topic of one author against another, and that seems to have helped her by letting her explore her own ideas going in both directions. But that's not, and she's not saying that can help you, that this is in fact a cure for depression, because that's really not what she's writing. She does talk about a lot of writers, Catherine Mansfield and Turgenev and William Trevor and a lot of writers, but mainly she doesn't focus on their fiction. She focuses on what she learned about them from their diaries and from their letters, and even the idea of authors who burned their letters and diaries to keep that part of their lives private. She goes into that. So I really think this is a good book. And I really think that the chapter in which she discusses her friendship with the short story writer and novelist William Trevor, who was a good deal older than she was during their friendships, I really think that chapter is important understanding essentially how she came to be at peace with herself. That in some ways she found Trevor's idea about life and death, about memory, about characters, about his own work, about fiction writing in general, and I think in some ways that's what she found to be important for her to not necessarily model her own ideas on, but important that someone had thought about all these things and had worked through all these things and was at peace with himself about these things. And that in the end is what I think she found in this 2-year process of thinking and reading and exploring the lives of authors and their ideas about the things that she thought about. So that's what I think after one reading, but I don't think in my life, well, that's not true. I can only think of a few times in my life in which I've read a book and thought almost immediately, I need to reread that so I can understand it better. This is one of those books. Another book would be W.G. Sebald's Rings of Saturn. Struck me in the same way. Beautiful, well-written, strange, beautifully constructive, thought-provoking, moving, powerful, but in the end, even at the end when I finished reading, still I feel like there's something of an enigma about them and what the books were about that makes me question whether I fully understood them. Anyway, I want to thank Sean for introducing me to this book. I really think it's a great book, and I really enjoyed it, and I am looking forward to finding the time to reread it and then go back and look at this review, and I think my ideas about the book here remain the same after a second reading. As always, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing your comments in the comment section below.